One small aspect about my name, I don't usually talk about myself too much, but one curious thing that I didn't really think of the relation to Kanban until recently is that Yuval in Hebrew means brook, small river. Go figure. So all of the material for this talk is available at bit.ly LKC12-Yuval. You can get the presentation and a couple of links from there, as well as links to the blog. I tweet at Yuval Yeret, so feel free to comment and say what you think about the talk. And what we're going to talk about today is a concept that I've been playing around with the last year, which is to start with the managers, or as it came up a couple of weeks ago, starting with the chickens in the old Scrum tale about pigs and chickens, the chickens being the managers, starting Kanban with the chickens. So that's the concept of the talk, but let's see how we get there. So I'm going to use one case study, the major case study that I've been working on the last year to provide examples for how this works, but I've also tried it elsewhere. So basically an example we have is CyberArk. It's a company developing network security products or IT security products, secure passwords, things like that. They're a very successful product company. They're doing significant growth. They're supposed to grow about 50% this year in the amount of R&D people that they have on their teams. A lot of technology, different kinds of technologies, Linux, Windows, and internals in Linux and Windows because it's all of the security stuff, C++, .NET, different kinds of things. So a lot of different kinds of competencies on the team. Strong people, very strong culture, and that's about it. That's the high-level context. If you look inside, you would see what I typically see when I go into a company and try to help them. There are different product lines, product A, B, C, different kinds of technology teams, and a very complex matrix between those two. So every work you need to do on product B might need people from a couple of different teams. That's the context. So what were the goals? What were they trying to achieve? Again, nothing really special here. They were trying to improve the alignment between the business and what R&D could provide, be more flexible to the needs of the product organization, higher quality releases, predictability, be able to be more flexible to change direction during a release, as well as be able to grow, support the growth that they were seeing already and the plans for next year. Then the next steps was pains that were troubling them in this endeavor. So they were seeing things like unclear requirements, lack of visibility, requirements that were all or nothing. Big things either go into the version or go out. Hard to sync all of this complex picture. Lots of escaping defects. Very hard to execute on cross-team features. Okay, features which required just one technology team, they were managing with. But since they were scaling, dealing with the cross-team features was hard. A couple of different pains. So they called us, they called Agile Sparks. We go and do Agile projects, and they wanted to start do things. So if we look at what we typically did until recently, it was either, go in and create Scrum teams, cross-functional Scrum teams, let them run a cross-functional team per product. That would work. Or recently do Kanban teams for that, or do Scrum teams and an end-to-end Kanban to manage the end-to-end flow and things like that. So all of that works. So what was the problem that I'm trying to deal with? One of the problems is if we start from Scrum and doing all of the cross-functional team, whether it's in Scrum or Kanban, that's a lot of change that you need to do upfront to deal with things. So that was too much, so we started to use the Kanban method more and more to don't really change all of the teams, just change the flow, just change the process without touching the teams. Fewer changes up front. And what you will see along the presentation is a couple of these slides. They're part of something I call an implementation canvas. It's something that shows you on the left the job that you need to do, the goals of the implementation, then the pains. Then here you see the solutions that you're applying right now, and some risks and validations that you need to do along the way in this step. So if we start with a Scrum or a big implementation, you see a lot of blocks here, a lot of things that are going on. So the improvement can be, let's do Kanban. Kanban is, at the face of it, you see less things going on. Okay? So what's the problem with Kanban itself? What we've noticed is a lot of places where we start to do things, we see management as the impediment. And a lot of people talk about it. Management don't want things to happen. Management are blocking things. And what I think, based on what I've seen, is that the main problem is their understanding. We're not working with them early enough. We're not focused on working with them. So they don't really understand what we want for them. And I don't think that's the right approach to do things. I think the right approach is at least to have them as part of the whole transition. But even better, why not have them go in first and then lead by example? So basically, the mode that we started exploring is how can we start the flow with the managers? Just the managers. Think about managers playing chess or something with the pieces, the avatars of the people on the Kanban board being pieces that they move at first. Not all of the people participate. Sure, there are problems with that and we'll discuss them, but there are some opportunities. So let's try to explore them. So the first attempt was to say, okay, we have this epic level Kanban, why not start with it? There's this Kanban board which shows all of the features, the big things. Managers, in any case, need to look at that board to see what is going on with their project or with their program. Let's start with this board. So the good thing about that, it's an opportunity to start managing flow. It's more natural to the managers at this level. It's a higher level than they're used. It's the level that they're used to manage. And it's easier to create it. Few items, big items that need to flow. That's good. What's missing is that the flow is very slow on these boards. There's slow learning. It's at a very high level. Every time I try to create this board, sometimes people use it, sometimes it's even hard to get them to use it because the flow is so slow. But for sure, it wasn't something that accelerated learning about flow in the organization. I wasn't able, at least I wasn't able to make that happen. So it's something that can complement internal flows at the team level, but it's not enough. Another option that I actually tried in a couple of places is to start with a cumulative flow diagram, not even a Kanban board. Just use the current system that you have and create a cumulative flow diagram on top of it and manage the release that way. So the good thing is that this answers another problem that people might have with starting with Kanban is the safety. It shows you where you were and where you're going to be if you do some trending on the CFD. And some people feel more comfortable with this view of their flow, their system, especially if they're coming from a world of guns and things like that, however wrong they were. So there's less resistance to doing this thing, especially if it's a current system that you're just doing another report on. The problem is that it's very hard to see inside. It's not very actionable at the day-to-day level. It gives you insight that maybe there's a problem that dev are outrunning test or something like that, or we're running out of buffers somewhere, but you need to dive deeper and do something. It's a good start, but it's not the ideal way to manage. But actually, I have a couple of clients that use this to implement something they didn't even know was called Kanban at the time to improve the flow of their projects. So it's working. So option 3 is something else. Option 3 is not an epic level Kanban. It's not a CFD. It's actually the Kanban that the people might run if they were using it themselves. It's the story level Kanban, the IT task level Kanban, whatever was the granularity that the actual people will move on the board. So here we have the example of the first board from CyberArk. What you can see here, the interesting part here, is that the stories running here are functional stories. But since we didn't create cross-functional teams yet, there's the issue that each card here requires work from a couple of different teams, like a backend team, an infra team, a UI team. So what we did here, it was their idea, was to say the whip here, there's a lane, a mini lane for each of those teams, and when a card is over here, I can know that for this card there's backlog or business logic work and UI work. None of that work has started because the frame is empty, okay? And they need to do that work, and only then can this card pull through. That's not the important thing here, but that's something that the leaders of those teams use together as a synchronizing point between them. At this level, they move the actual story cards, and this is called somewhere team story cards. Okay, the important thing is this is a proxy board. The actual engineers will see that board, okay? It's good that they will see it. It's not hidden for them, for sure. But it's not something that I'm expecting the engineers to move cards on a day-to-day basis, at least not at first. The managers move the cards. The managers have the flow discussions. And what I'm trying to do here is a couple of things. The first thing is I'm trying to teach the managers how to think about flow, how to think about stop starting, start finishing, how to see, wow, we have too many things here. What do we want to do with them? So I want to bring the relevant people into the room. In this case, the VP R&D, a director which was the leader of this team looking at this board, even though it was one level beneath where, below where he would typically focus his work, and team leads who had people involved here. So those people need to learn how to think about flow. And the thing that I'm validating here as well is before I go out and sell this to all of the engineers and implement this with all of the engineers, is that their leaders, their managers are into it, understand it enough in order to support this and ideally run it with themselves later on. And there are a couple of cases here. One is that they'll buy it, and in CyberArk they indeed bought into it. There are other cases where at first people don't buy into it. And you can say, okay, let's go to the teams anyhow, but the wiser thing to do at this point is to work on change management and buy-in with the managers first. Maybe there are pains that you need to deal with at first, things that you need to do. So how this looks like on a day-to-day basis is they had flow meetings 3 times a week. This here is the director with all of the team leads around them. At some point, they moved to an electronic tool to link it Kanban. They do discovery sessions to pull features, work on the product management side, work with the product managers, features into minimally marketable features, then offline breaking them into stories. And the structure of their meetings was to discuss flow, to go specifically into items that had flow problems, do some discovery of what's coming up and what are the options of the new things that we need to do, and at the end, a retrospective in each of those meetings. Inside this meeting is what we call Kanban agenda meeting or things like that. So the first step we did was start with this board for one single group. It was to visualize and manage the flow. What's missing here? Based on the last session that you were in, maybe? What aren't we doing here? Any ideas? Limit WIP. Right. We're not limiting work in progress at the moment. On purpose. We're starting with understanding how the flow works and asking, okay, is this stop starting, start finishing every couple of times? I had the VP R&D asking the team those questions as part of these discussions, coming on from time to time and talking about it. And after a few weeks, we saw that people are already relating to this kind of thinking. Not necessarily doing all of the things I would like them to do at this point. So not a lot of investment in versatility and things like that at this point, but starting to think and realize that they have an issue with high WIP limits. So the next step was to instate WIP limits, to have a more formal tracking of this thing and using it to improve. And at that point, something else interesting started to happen. If we look at the whole view of the boards that ran in this organization, we started with this first Kanban. And what happened is after we started, even before, as part of the initiative, we didn't run any new boards or any new, what we call here, product stream teams or opportunity teams or discovery teams. We didn't do anything proactive as part of the change management. But what we saw happen is the team leads that were part of this seed team started to create Kanban boards for their teams in their rooms, just to manage the internal work of the technology team. For starters, these were the team leads that were involved in the first project. Another thing that we did, this one was proactive, was do an experiment around the feature team. We knew this was a direction we wanted to check out, so we did an experiment for a full feature team that used Kanban. And the next thing that happened was that there was viral spread to other product stream teams. Other product managers and R&D leads came and say, we want this. We want to start this for our own. Please support us, or if you don't have bandwidth to support us, we'll do something. We'll copy the board, do some changes of our own, and we'll start to work with that. Create the meetings and start to work with that. And of course, once that happened, the involved technical teams that weren't part of the original pilot also joined and had Kanban boards of their own, Kanban systems of their own. At some point, people also learned about personal Kanban. This was just after the Agile Israel conference where Jim Benson talked about personal Kanban, and they got into it. So we started seeing a lot of personal Kanbans popping up. So we see here that with a very small start, not much investment compared to other transitions that we did, this was a very fast viral growth. All of this happened across 4 months, 3-4 months. but it doesn't always happen that way. Okay? The good news, it happens. The bad news, it doesn't always happen. And I'm not sure yet why. What is the ingredient for this viral spread? But I'm thinking it relates to the culture and how open people are to change and how dedicated managers and leaders are to doing it. How do they talk about it? Maybe it's the personal connection to the coaching team or to the coach, things like that. There are a lot of variables we're still trying to fine-tune this approach, okay? It's not something that's bulletproof at the moment. So let me stop here for a second and ask if there are any questions about this at the moment, and if you've seen any other ideas that might be attractors for more viral spread of processes like Kanban. So questions or ideas?
I believe success draws attention. So if you build success in one team, other who want to learn what they did, so well they achieved.
Okay, so Pavel talks about success as an attractor, success somewhere as an attractor for other teams. Any other ideas? Questions so far? Okay, so let's move on. Another thing that will happen in a different way is that it's a different kind of implementation. Even from the coach perspective and how we manage our work, it's a different kind of implementation. It's slower. It's hard to go into full immersion mode of being with the organization, doing everything at once, and after 3 months going away. It's not enough to have one big spark in the beginning and then going away. You need to keep doing small sparks along the way. So let's talk about results. These are the real results from the organization. Here we're looking at the Kanban depth charts that have been popular in the last couple of months. Who has ever seen one of those? Okay, so for those of you who haven't, these basically look at the couple of different aspects of the Kanban method, and for each of those aspects, it tries to give you an idea for how shallow or deep your implementation is across those aspects. So if I look at this example, we can see that based on my opinion, this is my assessment of them, we're going to let them run it on their own soon, but based on my assessment, they're quite good at visualization, managing the flow, explicit policies, WIP limits, shaky discipline. They're doing things, but there's shaky discipline around the WIP limits. One of the problems with the way we created this thing is that there isn't something that says, we're doing it, but not really. So the problem that I'm seeing, or the opportunity here, that there's not much around improvements and feedback loops. Okay? There's a shallow improvement culture. We are seeing things. It's not where it can be at, especially looking at the potential of this organization. So what have we seen happen? Continuous integration is something that they've seen can help them reduce the WIP limit and deal better. There's a clearer reasoning and initiative around feature teams now. They understand how it can help them with versatility and focus and reducing the overhead on some people. There are some experiments with the meeting structures, with ATDD, things like that. An interesting thing is, I mentioned they started with smaller Kanban boards or Kanban systems for each of the technology teams. Something that happened was the technology team and the testing team that worked on those issues combined their Kanban boards. Okay, so instead of having 2 boards, now they have one Kanban system. That's an evolution that they chose and implemented, just from their ideas. And if we look at the survey that we did when we started the implementation, that's the red one, the level of pains across a couple of different pains that we discussed before, and something that we measured a couple of months later, we see that there is about 30% reduction in perceived pain based on what we asked team leaders and above in the organization. Now let's talk about challenges. The main challenge is things that relate to the fact that we're running multiple complicated, complex Kanban systems. So for example, if we have an infra teams and DBA teams are the worst stuff, no matter what system you use. They need to work with all of the teams, synchronize the work everywhere, and on the other hand, most of the time, you don't need a full infra guy or DBA, or you cannot afford a full infra or DBA on your team, so they move around the team. They have the worst context switching and weak problems. And in this specific case, the problem that they had was that they had to listen or pull work from a couple of different product stream boards into their team board, and it was a lot of overhead. It's a problem for them. So that's one kind of problem. The other, even bigger problem is management overhead, especially considering that the organization wants to hire more and more people, more and more developers. The problem with the pattern that we did right now is it's not something sustainable. It's a transient pattern. It's a pattern that deals with the constraint upfront of the management understanding and learning, but at some point, if they learn, then the constraint becomes something else. The constraint moves to their capacity to support this. So at this point, what we want is to scale it via empowering the people, decentralizing a lot more of the decisions of the ongoing flow as well as the improvement decisions. So that's what we're working on right now. We're working on creating more full Kanban teams where the actual engineers will pull the work and manage the flow. But now we have the managers that understand everything and will support it and will mentor them and will guide them and will support different kinds of improvement initiatives that people will try. That's the advantage that we have at this starting point. So the next step in the implementation canvas is to say, okay, we started with managers Kanban. We added some cumulative flow diagrams limiting the WIP. Now what we do is we move to full Kanban. That's the next step that we're going to try. We want to validate, though, that this helps us scale. That's what we expect to see here. Another way to look at it is that what we did here is we applied Kanban to what Bob Marshall calls the analytic mindset. It improves the flow, it improves things, but at some point you reach a barrier. There's a glass ceiling. You cannot really move further without going to the synergistic model, which says empower the people, create small pods that can be decentralized and be more autonomous. But you're doing that because you realize that's what you need to do, not because Yuval or whoever else came in and told you, you know, pods are very cool or feature teams are very cool, and go do them, although there are a lot of pain to create. The other things that we're thinking of is to create the improvement framework to make this more sustainable, use operational reviews with the metrics that we're now starting to have, overlink it, do an improvement kata, select a couple of different areas to focus on and start to improve them step by step. I'm sure that go to Haken's talk if you want to learn more about the improvement kata. I wouldn't talk too much about that. And the next step for the managers is to coach their teams towards improvement. The other thing to do, small thing, is to get rid of that shaky word around the WIP limits. They will see a lot of improvements if they really do something about the WIP limits, not just have them somewhere in the area. So that's the next step, the improvement framework in this implementation steps canvas. Another thing that we're looking at, we're not sure yet, is to free some more managers' capacity to deal with improvement via improving their own kind of work. So that's a direction for personal agility, personal Kanban, Pomodoro, things like that, to improve their meetings, their personal work, things like that, just to free capacity. We see that a lot of the problem is capacity of the managers. My main challenge there is the ability to have discussions and sessions with people. They don't have enough time for that. Remember, a lot of people scaling the organization, it's a very tough period. So the things I want you to remember from this model is what's the purpose? The purpose of starting with managers Kanban is to have an easier, more effective change management approach. Start with the managers, make sure they understand. Validate first that they understand. Don't go further before you have a good model working with them. There are a couple of alternatives. Some cases, starting with the CFD, might be a good start, even more minimal. Some cases you will want to do a full Kanban board. And try to think about when to use this thing, what size of team warrants using this approach, what is a team that's too small and not worthwhile to do this. I've used this on teams that are 15 people overall, and I've had, and was happy that I used it, okay, because working with 3 managers or 3 team leads of this 15-person team, I've seen some resistance that I was happy to see at the forum of 4 people instead of the whole 15 people. And I've used it in a group of 50 people, and I'm currently using it in a group of 400 people, just working with the 10, 15, 20 people at the top. But in this case, there are a couple of different changes that we might need to do. When to stop using is one of the important ones here. We need to remember that in any case, we're talking about dynamic systems, but in this case, it's something you need to remember. At some point, this will become an impediment to your implementation. At some point, managers are going to become the bottleneck. And it's worthwhile, if you're using this, to mention that up front. It's something temporary. If we learn that we're in the right direction, we'll throw it away. It's similar to what's called a concierge MVP, minimum viable product in lean startup. It's something that's not very cost effective. You're doing things by hand, not automated, not using the right approaches, but you're doing it to learn, and at some point, if things work, you'll need to replace it with something that's much more effective, much more efficient. And we have time for a couple of questions, and again, all of the materials are over there. Yes.
Do you have any questions? Last chance.
That's more an experience than a question. I'm working with a similar number of managers at the moment, and we took their problem tracking system out of SharePoint and put it onto a Kanban board as a teaching tool as much as anything, and they're now having a 30-minute stand-up every morning. So they're learning to do the same kind of practices that people in their teams are already learning to do, and it's quite cool.
Yeah, so another alternative that I didn't mention here, and thanks, Mike, for bringing it up, is teaching the managers through something that's not the real flow of work. So, for example, the flow of impediments or improvements that they need to deal with, or management decisions, whatever. That's another alternative. I didn't have the chance to try it too much until today, but I think it's another thing that can work.
Any more questions?
Who made the starting point for this initiative? Was it you or the manager, or
What do you mean the starting point?
why did you start doing this work like you did?
So why did we choose this specific approach, or why did we use Kanban to improve them?
Why did you use Kanban to improve?
Okay, so they were looking to improve flexibility, time to market, quality, things like that. And they came to us, to Agile Sparks, and they said, okay, we want to be more agile. Help us figure out the way. What we did was we took 15, 20 people from the top of their management team, put them in a room, gave them a lot of options, Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, mixes, this kind of Kanban, discussed how it can help them with their pains, how does it map to the pains that they came with before, and then they decided they want to start with this kind of Kanban up front, as well as a test of feature teams to see where that takes them. So that was how it started. And typically we start all of our engagements. Yes, why do we want to do something? These are the options. We see the fit, the ROI on each of those options per what the organization needs, and the organization starts.
Anyone else?
Do you think that an organization can do this change on its own?
Yes.
What do you need for that?
It's actually the thing that you need, even if you have coaching from outside, you need to want it. You need to understand why you're doing it. That's the main thing. You need to have attention for it. It needs to be somewhere on the top two issues that the leadership of the group that's doing something needs to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I've seen Agile initiatives or Kanban initiatives slow down or stumble because the organization was doing it while opening groups in China and moving some of the things to Ukraine at the same time and dealing with the new agenda. And there's a certain level of whip that managers can deal with. So having whip for the change, desire for the change, and the knowledge for how to do things. But that's something that, you know, if you have good people and they have time to read a bit, go to conferences, watch the sessions, they can actually do this on their own, I think.
Okay, as we run out of time, I remind you about feedback cards. The box is there, so don't forget to put one of those.
Thank you, guys.
Green. And thank you, Yuval.
Thank you.